Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast Livestream. Just a few minutes late, my apologies. Had a few technical difficulties on my end, but we are here now, and I'm still recuperating from several days in the great state of Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth. You might have seen some of our newscasts there. Just came to you from my phone, kind of down and dirty in the DFW, but there was a lot going on that we wanted to share with you, and there continues to be a lot of breaking events unfolding in the world's most chaotic, most volatile, most strategic region, the Middle East right now. So we've got a lot to talk about today. Look, we're going for about an hour, and we will be taking your questions for our Q&A session towards the end of this live stream. So please send along some good questions, and we will hopefully get to all of them. It's tough because our viewers are educated. I'm going to give everyone props out there. Our Watchmen viewers are highly educated, highly knowledgeable, and always ask a bunch of great questions. It is tough to get through all of them, but we do our best to get to most of them. The questions are always great. So folks, be sure to send those along. We've got a lot to talk about. In particular, a topic that I've been kind of saving for the live stream because I knew there would be a lot of feedback here about this particular topic, Israel and Saudi Arabia. Folks, we're hearing about it more and more in recent days, including from the current administration in Washington, D.C. Is a peace deal, a normalization of relations possible between Israel and Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam, even 5 years ago, perhaps, certainly 7 to 10 years ago at least, this would have been unfathomable. This never could have possibly happened. Israel and Saudi Arabia normalizing relations, full diplomatic relations, no way, it can't happen. And yet, from Benjamin Netanyahu, members of his cabinet, to obviously the Biden administration, the Trump administration before it, which had more obviously validity when they talked about it, they're all talking about the possibility of a major deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And what I found fascinating and why I want to hit on this a bit today is that Israel's foreign minister, Eli Cohen, said yesterday that he believes that by 2024, next year, we could see direct flights from Israel to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Wow, folks, what do you think of that? I'd love to get your input here. What are your thoughts? And we've talked about this before, but now the conversations in the halls of power, so to speak, are intensifying clearly. Direct flights from Tel Aviv to Mecca by next year? We need to talk about this. What are your thoughts on this when you first hear it, number one? Obviously, we've got the backdrop of the Abraham Accords over the past few years with other Sunni Arab nations, including some of Saudi Arabia's immediate neighbors, making peace with Israel, talking Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, and both of those peace agreements had the blessing of the Saudi royal family. Are there prophetic implications here? Can the Saudis in a potential deal with Israel be trusted? When I think of the prophetic implications, I'm thinking Ezekiel 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog, which we've talked about many times here in the newscast. Funny name, I know, but very, very important. I don't believe the Saudis would play a nefarious or sinister role in that war, by the way. We're going to talk about that. What are your thoughts? I'm just throwing that out there to begin. What are your thoughts on a possible peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia? That's the big one, right? We could have these Abraham Accords agreements, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco. Israel obviously normalized relations with Jordan and Egypt decades ago. But Saudi Arabia, folks, just for the pure symbolic value, that would be the big one, no doubt. The birthplace of Islam, of course, Mecca, Medina are there, the two holiest sites in Islam, in their view. So this would have massive, massive regional and even global ramifications. It would be earth-shaking. And when I interviewed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu back in late December, he said as much. He said, look, this would be, quote, a quantum leap for Israel. But I want to know what you think, how you feel about this. Could it be a good thing? Are you concerned about it? Throwing that out there from the get-go here. And hey, welcome to everyone. By the way, I'm just checking out our scroll here down the side here on my laptop. Everyone joining us in the live chat. I see a fellow Pennsylvanian. Welcome from Erie. That's the other side of the state from where I'm from, Philadelphia. Let's see. We'll have people from all over the world by the time we are done here. It's already August, folks. Hard to believe, right? August 2nd. We will have thousands with us before the day is done, before this live stream is done. Make sure to send those questions along. We're also going to talk today. We're going to hit on a topic we've been hitting on pretty frequently over the past several weeks: the tinderbox to Israel's north in southern Lebanon. Listen, Hezbollah is really, really pushing the envelope on that northern border in a way perhaps that it hasn't since the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah, the second Lebanon war, as it was called, 17 years ago. Things haven't been this hot along the Israel-Lebanon border since that time. And folks, that does not bode well for the future. We've talked about the Great Northern War that I believe is coming, and coming sooner rather than later. Clearly right now, Hezbollah and its masters in Tehran, the Iranian regime, not to mention the likes of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad and the rest, they see an opportunity in Israel. They sense an opportunity in these internal protests unfolding in Israel right now, these massive demonstrations against the government, the judicial reform debate, which has Israelis at each other's throats, quite literally in the streets, mass demonstrations, as I said. The Iranian regime and its proxies like Hezbollah are watching all of this very, very closely. Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, as we reported here in the newscast recently, said that Israel is at its weakest point since its miraculous rebirth in 1948. He didn't call it a miraculous rebirth. I did, because that's what it was. But Nasrallah believes that Israel, and by extension his Iranian masters, believes that Israel is at its weakest point in 75 years since its rebirth as a nation back in 1948. They see this internal discord, this massive internal divide, and quite literally Israel's enemies are salivating. Folks, they are licking their chops at the prospect of Israel being divided. A house divided against itself cannot stand. We know that. But they are certainly salivating at the prospect of the Israel Defense Forces even being divided. Look, thousands of Israeli reserves right now are refusing to report for duty because they oppose the Netanyahu government's judicial reform legislation. This is unprecedented in Israel. And wow, I mean, to see Israelis, reservists who understand the depth of the threats that Israel is facing externally, to see them boycott military service, I have to shake my head. And I know many Israelis are as well. What a time to do that when external threats are gathering against Israel, perhaps like never before, when Iran is driving for the bomb for nuclear weapons. The Israel Defense Forces need all hands on deck, needless to say. So for thousands of reservists to say, hey, we're not going to report for our reserve duty, folks, that is a major, major problem. So it's no surprise that the Iranian regime and the likes of Hezbollah, Hamas, etc., see all of this and say, that's never happened before. Wow. And they're rubbing their hands with glee and saying, okay, how do we take advantage of this and when do we strike? There was a meeting just 2 weeks ago. The Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps of Iran, its elite Quds force, met with Hamas leaders and other terror leaders at an undisclosed location, and they talked about how to capitalize on the unrest in Israel. Their conclusion, according to reports out of the region, and by the way, this meeting took place in an undisclosed location, but their consensus out of that meeting was that they should kind of stand back and watch all of this unfold in Israel. The Iranian regime said, look, if we wade into this right now and attack Israel in some form or fashion, a terror attack or something, then Bibi essentially, in their words, rallies Israelis who were divided, rallies them around the flag, and they unite against an external foe. So Iran is kind of laying back and seeing how all of this is going to play out. If you talk to Benjamin Netanyahu and if you hear from Israeli officials, they're saying, look, yes, there is internal discord right now, no doubt. But they'll say, number one, it shows that Israel is a free and open society. It's a vibrant democracy. And number two, they assure us that when the rubber hits the road and there's an external threat gathering, you can bet your bottom dollar that Israelis, in particular the Israel Defense Forces, will be united as one against Iran and its proxies. I believe that, by the way, folks. I believe at the end of the day, Israelis will galvanize and they will rally if an external threat is pressing hard to the point where we're at the brink of war. I do believe that. But nonetheless, the optics aren't good right now. To see Israel on the ground seemingly so divided with massive demonstrations that have lasted for 30 weeks, 29 weeks, 30 weeks now of nonstop demonstrations against the government. So the optics to the outside world and to Israel's enemies are not good. Although Israel says, again, look, when the time comes, when the rubber hits the road, we will be united. You don't have to worry about that. Our enemies better not get overconfident because we will be united and then some. And that's great. And I believe that. But nonetheless, it may make the division may make Israel's enemies more bold. I think it already is. And look no further than what's happening on the northern border right now with these consistent provocations by Hezbollah. Again, folks, really acting up and acting out in a way that they haven't in 17 years since the last war between Israel and Hezbollah way back in 2006. I remember that war vividly, by the way. It seems like yesterday, but 17 years have gone by. So clearly Israel's enemies have been emboldened by the internal strife. I think there's no question about that. Israel is a free and open society, and it is a democracy, no doubt, and that would be the response from Israelis. I get it 100%, but nonetheless, look, it does have the effect also of transmitting a certain message to Israel's enemies. I believe that Israel's enemies are taking the wrong message out of this. I do believe, again, that Israelis will galvanize when needed. But nonetheless, that's the situation, and that is the state of play. Hey, one more thing to keep an eye on, and we may delve into this further on tomorrow's newscast, is Russia and Israel. Russia has this essentially a grain blockade right now, blockading Ukrainian grain shipments. Now, Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe in many ways and shipping grain throughout the world. Well, today, Iranian-made, key point there, Iranian-made drones utilized by Russia struck what would have been a grain shipment, 40,000 tons of grain, which would have headed from Ukraine, from a port on the Danube River. It would have made its way to eventually to Israel, to China, and to African countries. Yes, I did say Israel. That grain was damaged by these drone strikes. Is it beyond repair? Is it usable? No idea. But this 40,000 tons of grain reportedly were struck by Russian drones. Again, some of that grain was meant for Israel. Let's see where this all goes. And let's see if Russia, number one, will apparently an Israeli ship kind of traversed this Russian blockade over the weekend and it ignored it and went on. How strictly will Russia enforce this blockade and cut off grain to the world, essentially, that comes out of Ukraine? That's going to be something to watch. And could this spark tension, more tension, I should say, between Russia and Israel? That's an item that just came across the desk today. We're not going to get into that too much today, but when we talk Ezekiel 38, 39, obviously, I believe what is coming, I've called it a great betrayal, which will eventually come where Russia does indeed turn against Israel as we get into the run-up of Ezekiel's war, that prophetic coming war. We're going to talk about that a bit more and the Saudi role in that, or non-role, I should say, in my view. And let's talk Mecca. Israeli flights to Mecca in a minute. We're going to talk about it real quick, just some housekeeping here before we get into it. And remember, questions at the end. Send your questions along for our Q&A session. I want to say hello to everyone watching from around the world. We've got, before we're done, we'll have thousands with us, which is great. Number two, if perhaps you've never been here on the channel, you like what you're hearing, hey, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell here on the channel. It's absolutely free to be a subscriber. Click that notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. I've shared this a few times. Some 73% of our regular viewers are not subscribed. That's crazy. Let's do it, and let's get everyone on board as a subscriber, because when we do that, it allows YouTube to send our videos out far and wide to more people and with more frequency. And we want that because we want to get the message out there for such a time as this. We're putting a lot of work into it, and we want people to hear what is going on in the Middle East and beyond in these prophetic times that we're living in right now. I like to say this channel is by God and for God. He has expanded our territory. We're fast approaching 700,000 subscribers. And that's because of you, because of God, first and foremost, and then because of you. We can't thank you enough. So be sure to subscribe and join us here every day so you never miss an upload, because a lot is going on. One quick note on that. We had 666K subscribers a few days ago. Yes, 666K subscribers. I said, let's get off that number as fast as possible, obviously. But it was interesting. Some commenters were saying, how dare you? You have 666K subscribers. How could you? Folks, what can I do? Unfortunately, there's a number between 665 and 667 that you have to kind of pass through in order to get to 667. So I didn't like to see it either, believe me, but we were stuck on 666. I hate to even say it, for about a day. And then we moved on to 667, thank God. But just for some of those commenters who were somehow offended by that and interpreted that as that was me having it on that number, it wasn't the case. It's kind of funny, but that wasn't the case. But I just thought everyone would get kind of a laugh out of that. But thank God we got off that number pretty quickly. And we're now at 668,000 subscribers. Hard to believe. Man, only God. And we're on a real push by the end of the summer to try and get to 700. Again, we want more people to hear this message around the world. Let's get into Mecca. Wow, I'm going to quote directly Eli Cohen, Israel's foreign minister. Here's what he said yesterday. Now, let me preface this by saying there has been some, I'm just pulling up on my phone. Pardon me. Give me 1 second. That's why I'm looking down. Let me preface this by saying there have been some, major conversations in recent days. As I pull this article up, folks, I have it. Really, between Biden administration officials, Israeli officials, and Saudi officials. Now, can the Biden administration actually help facilitate a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia? They're saying they'd like to, but folks, the problem is they want major concessions from Israel that I don't believe Prime Minister Netanyahu can make, nor should he make, just on principle, because these concessions are wrong. But secondly, his right-wing government, there's a good chance if he made these wide-ranging concessions that the Biden administration wants, there's a good chance that Netanyahu's government would collapse. That's how serious it would be. Basically, the Biden administration obviously wants Israel to halt any so-called settlement building in Judea and Samaria. The Saudis apparently want the right to have nuclear reactors or to develop nuclear reactors, which could, worst case scenario, obviously eventually be weaponized, potentially. Excuse me. And there's some other concessions. Certainly the Biden administration would love Israel to withdraw from territory and establish a Palestinian state. That ain't happening under Benjamin Netanyahu. But as usual, and we've talked about this on the newscast before, the U.S. government and the world, they ask everything from Israel. Concession after concession after concession, and nothing from the Palestinians. Nothing. What are the Palestinians being asked to give up? Are they going to vow to cease terror? Haven't seen that. What is being asked of the Palestinians? Can someone share that with me? I'm not seeing it. When I hear about concessions, when I'm hearing about this potential Israel-Saudi deal, I'm hearing, oh man, well, if Israel wants that, they got to make major concessions. What concessions does Saudi Arabia have to make? And the Palestinians, they're dragged into this. I thought this was a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Where do the Palestinians come in? Well, the Biden administration wants to use this as leverage against Israel. They're saying, Israel really wants peace with Saudi Arabia. And we will dangle that in front of Israel, but with a caveat. And for the Biden administration, that is the empowerment of the Palestinians. I don't even know, is Saudi Arabia, is Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, who's really the main power broker in that country now, is he really demanding that? I'm not so sure. But is the king of Saudi Arabia, who seems to be more of a figurehead now. Mohammed bin Salman seems to be kind of the man in charge of the day-to-day. Is he demanding that? Certainly the Biden administration is, again, using that as a cudgel against Israel and saying, hey, we'll give you, we could help forge an agreement with Saudi Arabia, but you have to make concessions. So that's a bargain, quote unquote, that I don't think Israel should take. Although, hey, look, total game changer to have a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. Obviously, the main reason Israel would want to do that is to continue to bolster its alliance against the Iranian regime and its proxies. We've talked about this many times. So I've called it kind of the sheep and the goats in a biblical sense. On one hand, you have obviously Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, those various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, the Assad regime in Syria as well, and the Houthis in Yemen. That's one side of the ledger, with the backing of Russia and China, and with Turkey kind of floating in and out and working alongside this axis from time to time. And then on the other side, you have Israel, Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, the Sunni Arab nations, which are threatened very much so by the looming threat of a nuclear Iran and, of course, Iran's proxies like Hezbollah. So it's essentially been a Middle East Cold War. Now, there was an interesting wrinkle there, and I'm getting to Mecca in a second, I promise, but just a little background for you first, backdrop. There was a very interesting wrinkle dropped into the mix back in March, which we covered pretty extensively here in the newscast. Iran and Saudi Arabia normalized relations after 7 years of non-relations and hostility. I said then, and I maintain now, the Saudis did this out of position of weakness. It was a deal brokered in Beijing by China's communist regime, but the Saudis did this clearly out of weakness. And why do I say that? Number one, Saudi Arabia looked across the ocean at its main backer and ally, the United States, and said, wow, the Biden administration is hostile, openly so, to the Saudi royal family. The Saudis are saying, well, we can't count on them. Not only are they hostile, they're weak. They've shown weakness time and time again on the world stage. So we can't count on them to have our back if things escalate with the Iranian regime and if Iran acquires the bomb. Secondly, Israel is clearly the strong horse in the region, but the Saudis are saying, wow, Israel is very much divided right now. Can we count on them? And thirdly, definitely a little bit of gamesmanship and political gamesmanship and chess playing by the Saudis, who are saying to the West and Israel, hey, look, we're not beholden to you. We have our own relationships. China brokered this deal. We have a relationship with Russia. We've got relations with Iran. So the Saudis are playing the game too. All of the above. Nonetheless, the normalization of relations did indeed occur between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And that's why it's so interesting that the Saudis are still on this normalization track with Israel as well. Because back in March, when that Iran-Saudi deal was cut, a bunch of us were asking, hey, what does this mean for Israel and Saudi Arabia? Is that dead in the water now? Well, apparently not. And look, could you have a situation where the Saudis have normalization agreements with both Israel and Iran? You could. You could also have the Iranian regime pulling out of its diplomatic agreement with Saudi Arabia and blasting the Saudis for normalizing relations with the Zionist entity. That could very well happen. So it's a very, very interesting time right now. And Saudi Arabia is kind of in the middle of all this. Now, in terms of the Biden administration, they want concessions from Israel that I don't believe Israel should make or will make under Prime Minister Netanyahu. That's number one. But number two, to give you an idea where Israel's coming from, I mentioned, look, it's a Cold War. Israel's lining up allies on its side. Makes perfect sense. I think there's also the symbolic factor with the Saudis. Look, it's the birthplace of Islam, the birthplace of Muhammad. Mecca and Medina are there. The Saudis, obviously, Saudi royal family is a wealthy power player, massive oil reserves. Many would say Saudi Arabia, probably neck and neck with Egypt, is the most influential Arab nation. Certainly the Saudis see themselves that way. So there's great symbolism in them normalizing relations with Israel. And the Saudis are even opening up tourism right now. I have Christian friends of mine who have traveled to Saudi Arabia to tour. I believe, and they believe, that Saudi Arabia is the true site of Mount Sinai, the biblical Mount Sinai and the Exodus story. But nonetheless, interesting things happening in Saudi Arabia under Mohammed bin Salman. The society is gradually, very gradually opening up a tiny bit. That's another thing. But for Israel, and when I interviewed Netanyahu, and some of his advisors have said the same thing, they have said on camera with me and to others that, look, if we establish relations with Saudi Arabia, it essentially means the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict, not the end of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But, and they said this throughout the Abraham Accords as well. The Trump administration felt this way. Netanyahu feels this way, his team. They're putting relations between Israel and the broader Arab world on a separate track from relations between Israel and the Palestinians. Israel and the Palestinians is over here. Israel and the Arab world is here. And Netanyahu and the Trump administration rightly read it. They read it correctly. They said, look, a deal with the Palestinians might never come. They don't want peace. But we've got kind of low-hanging fruit here with these Sunni Arab nations. And lo and behold, 3 years ago, almost to the day, we had the announcement in August 2020 that the UAE and Bahrain were normalizing relations with Israel. I was at the White House in September 2020 for the signing of the Abraham Accords, a day I'll never forget, just amazing. Then Morocco came into the fold, Sudan as well, but Sudan, who knows what's going to happen there, folks? What a tumultuous situation. I think in the long term that peace won't hold. But nonetheless, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, adding to Israel's normalization agreements, longstanding with Jordan and Egypt. So Netanyahu says, look, and we have arguably the biggest power players in the Arab world, Egypt, Jordan, and the UAE, which is obviously Dubai, Abu Dhabi, financial powerhouse. Egypt, Jordan, UAE. Saudi Arabia is kind of the fourth major power broker in the Arab world. So if you got Egypt, Jordan, and the UAE, and you bring the Saudis into the fold, look, Syria and Iraq, that's not happening anytime soon. Those two Arab nations, obviously. But Saudi, Egypt, Jordan, UAE, that's a pretty big accomplishment. Israel says, look, we've got peace with our neighbors for the most part. And then there's the Iran axis, which is far from a peaceful situation. But that's kind of Israel's thinking. What do you think? I'd like to hear your comments. I'm going to read over them shortly. Let's get into the Mecca comments. Wow. Hey, before I do you like this shirt by any chance? This Watchman swag, as my daughters would call it. Pretty cool stuff. We've got the Watchman shop right now by popular demand. We had so many people on our live streams and in the comments saying, hey, when you got some merch, some Watchman gear that I can sport. So we do have it now. Go to shop. You know what? My trusty producer, Daniel, will throw the URL up on screen. I believe it is shop.tbn.org/Watchman. We've got some cool t-shirts, some hats, mugs, Hoodies are coming, some good stuff there. Cool way to show that you're a fan of the channel and support the channel. And it also supports keeping us on the air. It's not free, unfortunately, to have a pretty large YouTube channel, a weekly TV show. So we appreciate your support. And hey, it's pretty cool gear. If my 16-year-old, my 12-year-old approve, I know it works. So thought I'd throw that out there as well. But let's get into Mecca here. Eli Cohen, Israel's foreign minister. I'm going to quote directly. I mean, obviously, non-Muslims do not travel to Mecca. That is the site of the annual Muslim pilgrimage, the Hajj. Non-Muslims do not enter Mecca. So I would assume that the direct flights from Tel Aviv to Saudi Arabia, at least at first, would be carrying Muslim travelers from Israel who are going to make that pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia. But let's see what Eli Cohen has to say. There could be, I'm quoting directly from the Jerusalem Post, bear with me, that's why I'm looking down. There could be direct flights between Israel and Saudi Arabia this coming March to allow Israeli Arabs to easily make the pilgrimage to Mecca for the Hajj, Foreign Minister Eli Cohen predicted on Tuesday. I hope this will happen by March of next year. Wow, that's what? Like 6 months away, I'm thinking. 5-6 months. Cohen made the comments during a meeting with Bedouins, the Bedouin community in Israel's Negev. He spoke amid increased diplomatic activity, as we've outlined, between Riyadh and Washington to explore the possibility of a security pact between Israel and Saudi Arabia that would include a normalization pact with Israel. So there you go. Normalization is... Look, the security pact is number one. Normalization is 1A. And the two essentially go hand in hand. But first and foremost, folks, and just as with the Abraham Accords, and yes, with the UAE, Bahrain, I've been to both countries since the Abraham Accords were signed. I've been to the Bahrain and the UAE on essentially fact-finding missions. And what's happening is amazing. A lot of commerce between Israelis and these Arab nations, tourists, people going back and forth on direct flights. Amazing to see. But at the end of the day, the main factor in the Abraham Accords, security. Again, Israel is lining up allies in Iran's immediate neighborhood, by the way, for when the day comes, when a major conflict comes to the region. More on that in a minute. Let's see. One of the things Eli Cohen said that he told the Saudis is that they should authorize flights from Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Wow. He said that he explained to the Saudis, this is for Muslims in Israel who make up 20% of Israel's population. He said the Saudis understand the economic benefits of normalization with Israel. And he said Israel and Saudi Arabia share an enemy. We are partners, and our enemy is Iran. That's Israel's foreign minister. I interviewed him, by the way, back in February. You saw it here in the newscast, Eli Cohen. Netanyahu said also on Tuesday, we have an opportunity to perhaps begin to end the Arab-Israeli conflict with Saudi Arabia. He's not going to get into specifics, but it's up to Saudi Arabia, Netanyahu says, to see if there is a middle ground when it comes to the Palestinians. It's presumed that Israel would have to make concessions to the Palestinians as part of the deal, but no one has named what that gesture would entail. I speculated earlier, settlement freeze, possibly even recognizing a Palestinian state. Obviously, that's a non-starter for Netanyahu's government. His government would revolt and it would collapse if he took those measures. So perhaps the Saudi normalization is further off than we think. Or perhaps it's closer. Perhaps Israel won't have to make that level of concession. Perhaps it's minor concessions, but I would think because it's the Biden administration in office right now, and they're in the middle of it, kind of mediating. We had the head of the Mossad, David Barnea, travel to D.C. last week. He met with top Biden administration officials, or earlier this month, not last week. It was early July. After that meeting, Jake Sullivan, who is the national security advisor for President Biden, flew to Saudi Arabia. So essentially, folks, I don't trust this administration in D.C. when it comes to the Middle East and when it comes to Israel. And they are going to try to leverage this for what they see as their benefit. And again, they're going to dangle this in front of Israel and say, hey, we talked to the Saudis, and the Saudis are saying they're in, but you need to do this, this, and this. And it could very well be unreasonable demands that Israel says, thanks, but no thanks. But make no mistake, the Biden administration is going to try and twist this to their benefit and what they see as the benefit of the Palestinians, while, again, I can't stress this enough, asking nothing of the Palestinians or the Saudis for that matter, but asking everything from Israel. Is it worth it? What do you think? I'd like to get your comments there. Okay. Great. But can you imagine that? El Al, folks, can you imagine El Al planes landing in Mecca, Saudi Arabia? Again, 7 years ago, I won't say 5 years ago, but 7 years ago, this was unthinkable. 10 years ago, completely unthinkable. We live in Bible times, prophetic times, no doubt. And we see, again, the sheep and the goat nations lining up. Before I get to Lebanon, and wow, your questions in about 5 minutes. So hang tight and send those questions along. My take on the prophetic implications of an Israel-Saudi deal. I think it would be an economic boon to both nations, no doubt. I mentioned the commerce and trade and tourism taking place between Israel and the other Abraham Accords nations. I've seen it firsthand. I've been in those nations in the wake of the Abraham Accords. I think certainly it would be a boon economically for both nations, and they would continue to prosper and prosper even more. But we do have the prospect of the Saudis and where they would land, no pun intended, we're talking about flights, where they would land when it comes to, and someone commented, yes, I know the flights go to Jeddah, not Mecca. We've got Amir. Thank you, Amir. Not Amir Sarfati, another Amir. Yes, Amir, I know that they go to Jeddah. I'm just talking about people going to Mecca. My apologies. I wasn't more specific, but thank you for pointing that out so no one gets it twisted. But I said, where do the Saudis land? No pun intended. We're talking about flights to Saudi Arabia. When it comes to Israel facing a major war in the region. Look, Israel, we've talked about, and we're talking about it now, the Great Northern War between Israel. Look, it's coming. Hezbollah in Lebanon and in Syria, the Iranian regime and their various proxies in Lebanon and Syria. The bulk of that fighting, I believe, will be sparked and will take place in the north. But it will eventually involve the entire ring of fire, Iranian-backed ring of fire that surrounds Israel on all sides. And that would be Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, and those various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria as well. So eventually that entire ring of fire that surrounds Israel would ignite. But it's going to be sparked, and the bulk of the action will be to the north in Lebanon and Syria. That's why I've called it the Great Northern War. Now, I believe that Israel, and it's interesting, we've had commenters ask about this, and we've talked about it here in the newscast. I believe there's a very good chance, folks, that before Israel strikes Iran's nuclear facilities, and I think it's a question not if, but when. I think it's come to that point. I think there's a good chance that Israel preemptively would strike Hezbollah. You know that an Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities would prompt Iran to unleash Hezbollah in a way that they haven't since 2006. Thousands of missiles a day would be flying from southern Lebanon into all points of Israel, which is the size of the state of New Jersey, just a reminder. So it seems, I'm not a military strategist, but I talk to Israeli military officials pretty frequently and IDF generals, et cetera, former, current, and they're very smart guys. I don't know. In my layman view, it would seem to make a lot of sense. If you know Hezbollah is going to If you know you're facing an onslaught from Hezbollah, preemptively take that out before you take care of Iran's nuclear facilities. I think back to 1967, the Six-Day War, when Israel destroyed Egypt's Air Force when it was still on the ground. And that was that. That was the war. So, interesting times, no doubt, prophetic times, Bible times. But we've got that northern war where I think Israel will decisively defeat Hezbollah and eliminate it as a constant looming threat. I do believe that. I believe Israel is going all in this time, once and for all with Hezbollah. But I do believe that great northern war, and some people have said, is it Psalm 83? Folks, I don't know. I know our friend Amir Sarfati, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, he did a really interesting commentary recently about that. He believes Psalm 83 has already been fulfilled. I believe Amir thinks it was in 67, the Six-Day War, or 48, the War for Independence. Not sure which one off the top of my head. But there's a good chance that Psalm 83 was already fulfilled. Some believe it's just allegorical, and others believe it is yet to come. I interviewed Bill Salas, my good friend, about Psalm 83. He's literally written the book about it. You can find it in our archives here on the channel. I guess you probably just type in the search bar, Watchman Psalm 83, something like that, if you want to check that out. And we got into it. So, look, with Psalm 83, I'm humble enough to tell you, I don't know. But I do know this. There is going to be clearly a war that I do know about, the war of Gog and Magog, Ezekiel 38, 39. Clearly that's laid out as yet to come. Ezekiel says it's coming in the latter days, Latter, latter days. Very specifically says in the end times, the latter days of humanity, that's when that war will come. I do believe that there will be a war before that war, though, and I think it is this great northern war. I think very good chance there's going to be a regional war, perhaps involving Israel versus Iran and its proxies, as a precursor to Ezekiel 38, 39. In a sense, Iran could almost look at the Gog-Magog war as a war of revenge against Israel. We shall see. Is Iran licking its wounds after its proxies are crushed and its nuclear facilities are eliminated, or at least, pushed back by many, many years? Does Iran feel the need to rally its friends like Russia and Turkey and have a war of revenge? Could that be the Gog-Magog war? The hook in the jaw to Russia? Could it be Israeli natural gas? A lot of factors there, a lot of fascinating things to discuss there when it talks about that. But I do believe there will be a war before the Gog-Magog war that kind of sets things up. Maybe I'm wrong, but if you look at Gog-Magog, and our good friend Bill Salas, who I mentioned, he's talked about this, the inner ring of nations that surround Israel, as Bill calls it, they're not mentioned in the War of Gog and Magog. The War of Gog and Magog does not involve one nation that's on Israel's immediate borders. Look, you're talking about North African nations, the stands, some of those former Soviet republics, Russia, obviously, Turkey, Iran, the major players there. So very, very interesting. So it would seem that Israel, with these pressing threats on its immediate borders, may have to deal with that first. But what do you think of the timeline? I'd like to get your thoughts on it. We've got some prophecy buffs here on the channel, and you've always got some great takes. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Those are my thoughts. I think that before the War of Gog and Magog, there will be another conflict that kind of sets that thing up. It seems that way, but what do you think? I'd like to get your thoughts on it as well. Man, a lot to discuss. But Saudi Arabia, where do they fall in that Gog? Back to the original point, in the Gog-Magog war, when Ezekiel talks about the merchants of Sheba and Dedan, which is clearly the Arabian Peninsula, I believe, and perhaps UAE and those nations, and the young lions of Tarshish, many have speculated, Western Europe, United States, Great Britain, they protest loudly against this Gog-Magog invasion, this coalition of nations, which I believe will be led by Russia, Iran, and Turkey, that come against Israel in the latter days. There's a lot of protest, a lot of probably UN resolutions, but at the end of the day, Israel is alone. In a physical sense, it doesn't appear that anyone is going to back Israel up militarily in that Gog-Magog war. You might say, oh my gosh, how does it turn out? That ain't good. Well, here's the good news. God Almighty, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, does indeed back Israel up and then some. This Gog-Magog invasion force doesn't get too far. They meet their demise on the mountains of Israel, and God shows himself to the world in a very, very public way that should be undeniable, but some will still deny it according to Scripture. But nonetheless, the war of Gog and Magog will open many eyes and hearts, I believe, to the Lord your God. Okay, let's get into questions. What do we have? Let's see what we have. Okay, I'm just pulling up the questions here. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, here we go. We've always got some good ones. Okay. Whew, let's see. We've got a bunch. Bear with me. I'm just scrolling through, guys and gals. Let's see. Okay, trying to get to August 2nd. Sorry. Just looking. Bear with me. Sorry. Okay. Here we go. I'm just reminded. I was scrolling back. I apologize for that little delay there. I'm in kind of our Watchman chat where the questions turn up, and we haven't done a live stream in a few weeks. I'm just recalling that. I was on the road, so we were unable to do live stream the past 2 weeks. It's great to be back with you guys. Stacy Thurnall says, what about the fish hook from the north? Who do you believe it is? Well, Stacy, that's Ezekiel 38:39 that you're talking about. I don't think it ever says a fish hook. It does say it's a hook. Maybe it's a fish hook. I don't think the hook is an entity. I think the hook, as I just mentioned, the hook in the jaw would be the leader of Russia. Yeah, Stacy, I think that's what you mean. The hook in the jaw would be literally the Russian leader is pulled down to the Middle East and down to the mountains of Israel. So whoever that Russian leader is, and folks, look, it may not be Vladimir Putin. Does he have some of the characteristics of Gog? Gog, the Russian leader, latter days leader? Certainly he does. He may not be the guy. Listen, he's 70 years old. His health has been questionable. A few weeks ago, he faced a possible revolt about a little over a month ago. The war in Ukraine is not going well, to say the least. Look, Russia's the kind of place historically where if a leader is highly unpopular and dividing the people, that he may not be long for this world. I'm not saying that he's killed. I should say not long for the role. He may be exiled. He may be removed from power. So Vladimir Putin may not be the guy. There may be someone after him even more ruthless who could play that Gog role. Nonetheless, the hook will be in the jaw of that Russian leader, I believe. And what could the hook be? What draws this leader to the Middle East? Could it be Israel's natural resources? Look, Russia is the natural gas superpower of the world, and Israel's quickly becoming a natural gas powerhouse. Could the Russian leader greedily say, we want it all for ourselves? I think that's a possibility that could draw him down. That's still kind of playing out. I think those chess pieces are still moving. Israel could have even greater natural gas deposits in the offing that could be discovered very soon. Let's see what else we have here. Good question, though, Stacey. Okay. Folks, more questions here. I'm not seeing too many. Unless I'm missing them. Daniel, we have a little bit more here. I only see a few. Been kind of light. Shame on you all. Just kidding. Just kidding. Okay, let's see what we got here. This is an interesting one. An interesting name. Not sure 1582. That's the handle. Says, what do you think of tensions between Iran and Turkey? Sunni versus Shiite. Wow, yeah, but I think ultimately Iran and Turkey have much more in common. Yes, there's obviously the Sunni Shia difference and divide, but ultimately Iran and Turkey are aligned today much more than misaligned, if that makes sense. As a matter of fact, Iran, Turkey, and Russia, which have been historic rivals, have fought wars against each other in centuries past, are now closer together in an unprecedented way, more than they ever have been. We see these meetings a few times a year, at least, between the leaders of Russia, Iran, and Turkey, looking very happy together, kind of a summit together. And Iran and Turkey, clearly, look, they are on the same page on a number of issues. First and foremost, Turkey, which is a NATO member, but under the radical rule of Recep Erdogan, is NINO, in my view, NATO in name only. First and foremost, I believe, is a hostility to the West. You might say Turkey's not hostile to the West. They're in NATO. Yes, they are. But increasingly, Turkey is turning to the East, into the open embrace of the likes of Russia and Iran. And clearly, Turkey has supported Hamas over the years, if not overt financial support, clearly cheerleading for Hamas and hosting Hamas leaders and all the rest. So again, Turkey and Iran have much in common, although there is the Sunni Shia divide. Now, both of them would love to lead the Muslim world. Turkey would love, under Erdogan, would love to lead a revived Ottoman Empire, a new caliphate, and Iran likewise would like to unite the Muslim world under its rule. So in some ways, certainly competitors, but at the end of the day, they will align against common foes when their interests converge, if that makes sense. So I don't see Iran and Turkey coming to loggerheads. I see both nations taking steps to avoid that. And eventually, I think they will be aligned in that Gog-Magog coalition. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Some interesting observations here. Wow. Some of it is interesting. I'm just looking at our chat where some of the questions I'm not quite sure where they're going. But okay, keep coming along, keep sending them. Okay, let's see. Here's a good one. Mike Mina Sr. asks, do the Kurds play any role in the current Middle East situation? Mike, they do. I was in Iraqi Kurdistan, let's see, almost 4 years ago, September 2019. What a memorable trip. I was in Erbil. I traveled to the Iraq-Iran border. I looked into Iran. Really a place not many American civilians like myself have stood since 1979, since the Iranian Revolution. I was on the Iraq-Turkey border filming and beyond with the Kurdish Peshmerga. Look, the Kurds are in the smack dab in the middle of a very nasty neighborhood. Wow. Surrounded by Turkey, the Assad regime in Syria, Iraq's federal government, which is basically a proxy of Iran, and Iran. I mean, the Kurds are surrounded on all sides. I say that Israel is the first line of defense for the free world. The Kurds are the first line of that first line. They are literally in the belly of the beast, in the middle of it. I love the Kurdish people. Many think that the Kurds perhaps are descendants of the ancient Medes from the Bible. The Medes and the Persians obviously had a great empire. But the Kurds' role today is kind of as an outpost of sanity in a sea of tyranny. So the Kurds need certainly our prayers, and they're tough people. Truly they are. But are they playing, to answer Mike's question, are the Kurds playing some huge influential role? No, I mean, the Kurds certainly are a factor, but I wouldn't say they're a power broker in the region, Mike, if that's what you're asking. The Kurds, remember, are also scattered throughout Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran. And there is no official Kurdish nation state. The closest the Kurdish people have is northern Iraq, which is Iraqi Kurdistan, which is an autonomous region in northern Iraq, which is essentially a Kurdish state. The Kurds have been persecuted horribly over the centuries, time and time again. They fought communists. They fought Saddam Hussein. They fought ISIS and were persecuted by all of the above. and now they're fighting Iran-backed Shia militias. So the Kurds can't catch a break, needless to say. And look, there's a reason that the Kurds admire Israel. Many Kurds admire Israel. Israel has established what the Kurds aspire to, their own nation state. The Jewish people, obviously, the most persecuted people in the history of the planet. So the Kurds have a lot of sympathy for Israel. Many Kurds, at least, have a lot of sympathy for Israel and an admiration for what Israel has been able to establish in the face of overwhelming odds. So there are also, too, to mention, many Kurds, thousands of Kurds, Kurdish Jews live in Israel today. Remember that Babylonian exile. Many Israelites, many Jews, many Judeans were carted away by Nebuchadnezzar to the Babylonian Empire, Iraq and Iran, Babylon and Persia, and many stayed, and their descendants are still there. I mean, mostly every Jew is out of Iraq right now. A few thousand left in Iran, but they are the descendants from 2,500 years ago from that Babylonian exile. Remember, many Jews returned. Cyrus's decree, the Persian emperor, many Jews returned to Israel. They rebuilt the temple, but some stayed, and their descendants for centuries were in Iraq and are still in Iran today. Little history lesson there for you. Hey, folks, this was great. Great to be back with you for the live stream. Apologies for any questions we didn't get to. We were light on questions today, but apologies for anything we didn't get to. And some of the questions were when you ask the questions, be clear and concise, because some of them were a little all over the place. No offense to anyone, but just be clear and concise, and we'll knock it out, I promise. But hey, thanks so much. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching.